I find the stories
Yeah.
of the pre-Socratics fascinating. Like I said at the beginning, they've each got their own character,
Yeah.
their own little island of thought, in their own sort of kind of bizarre little way. And I just think they're all fascinating. I did have one thing I wanted to say though, that with the exception of the Miletians,
Yeah.
who these three most famous Miletians anyway, who do seem to very, very much one after the other, reacting one after the other in a clear line of thought. That actually all the so-called pre-Socratics are actually over a few hundred years, and there's lots of them, lots and lots. We'll only be picking out the most famous ones. These three are sort of the most famous early ones. And in fact, the story is more complicated than that. I just want to mention that real quick. So, for example, in our modern world, if you were going to do an undergrad or even a master's or a PhD or something in philosophy, you would be expected to become familiar with all the greats that came before, right? That's the whole point of doing formal study, isn't it? That you become aware of all the great thinkers that have already been. Otherwise, you wouldn't be taken very seriously. Well, that wasn't necessarily the case with the pre-Socratics, with the exception perhaps of these first Miletians. So I've got one quick quote here, if you don't mind me reading.
Of course.
And it's from a historian called Martin West.
Okay.
He said, quote, "Early Greek philosophy was not a single vessel with a succession of pilots briefly commanding and trying to steer towards an agreed destination. One tracking one way, the next altering course in light of his own perceptions. It was more like a flotilla of small craft whose navigators did not all start from the same point or at the same time, nor all aim for the same goal. Some went in groups, some were influenced by the movements of others, some travelled out of sight of each other." So I think where we've sort of trying to paint quite a clear picture for everyone that this guy thought this, and then the next guy came along, built on it and thought this, and so on and so on and so on. It's actually more complicated than that. And we'll get into it when we speak about more people.
Yes, of course, yeah.
That they didn't all build on each other perfectly. And we somehow just, this perfect pyramid of knowledge, and we somehow get closer and closer to the truth. It's not like that. It's more like a chaotic thing of all different people thinking all different things.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make that point, because I think that's more realistic. That's actually closer to truth, to the reality. It was more like lots of ships doing their separate thing.
I agree with this.
Okay, great. I just wanted to throw that in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so before we go to Heraclitus, I want to say something about the similarities and differences that we see with the Homeric paradigm and the pre-Socratic paradigm. So some of the similarities is that both Hesiod, for instance, and the pre-Socratics try to uncover a discernible order of the world. Both believe that the world is order and can be understood. And this is an article of faith for both.
Right, yeah. And for all modern scientists, right?
Yes.
On some level, that's what science is based on, that it is going to be possible for us to understand. We've got to just have faith in that.
Yes. And there are all sorts of principles that are involved in scientific explanation that cannot be established by sense experience.
Right.
So yes, there are articles of faith. For instance, the principle of the causal closure of the physical. It just says that every physical event has physical causes and only. That's not something that you can establish by the limited sense experience of human beings. This is something that functions as an article of faith. And it functions as an article of faith for everyone now. Yeah.
It's like the idea that it's only possible for us to optically see down to a certain level. So, for example, there's no micron telescope or microscope or optical microscope or anything like that that has ever seen an electron, for example. It only really exists mathematically, in a sense. Of course, we think they exist actually physically, but it's not possible to ever see one, at least yet. But you can sort of have a mathematical proof that it must be there, and so you have to have a little bit of a leap of faith, right, to assume that it's really real.
Yeah.
So, well, I just find that interesting that even today we still have to make some leaps of faith.
Another similarity is that both believe that such an order can be correctly described and communicated to others with language. Third similarity, both Hesiod and the pre-Socratics think that the divine is important. They differ in their conceptions of it. And fourth similarity, that both Hesiod and the pre-Socratics share an interest in both physical and moral aspects of the world, above all justice. And now let's go to the differences. Traditional Greek mythology is omnipresent in Hesiod, but pre-Socratics think it is blasphemous. And the gods are not anthropomorphic in the pre-Socratics. And Hesiod's idea were traditional and isolated from criticism on that basis. The ideas of the pre-Socratics were new and they were not isolated from criticism. Here is where we talk about a tradition that people actively participated in with their thinking. It may be an uninterrupted tradition of contact in the case of the Milesians, but when we think of pre-Socratics at large, of course, not everyone knew of everyone else and reacted to everyone else. As you said, it's more complex. So let's go to Heraclitus of Ephesus. Mm-hmm. He is the first pre-Socratic who used the term logos. And he, in a philosophically important sense, of course, the word logos was used before, but he put forward the notion of the logos as a philosophical cosmic principle or reasoned account. He was the first to do so. So Heraclitus was born around 540 BC and lived for about 60 years. And he was an aristocrat in Ephesus. He was entitled to a hereditary and possibly honorary kingship, which he renounced and he passed on to his brother. He was very elitist and he was a loner. He didn't like people very much. And there is a story, I think, again from Diogenes Laertius, that he died by diving into cow manure because he thought that that was going to prevent his soul from degenerating. So he had, maybe this is people making fun of him. Okay. Now, we have many fragments from Heraclitus. Right. And he talks about almost everything: religion, politics, ethics, metaphysics. The thing is that we can talk about some of his fragments and focus first on the more, let's say, famous ones, and then move into the fragments where he talks about the logos and possibly some ethical fragments when he talks about virtue. One thing to say is that Heraclitus is notoriously obscure. He writes in an aphoristic style. Nietzsche loved him, especially for his style. And almost everyone who reads Heraclitus comes up with a different interpretation.
Right, yeah.
But he's considered to be the dark philosopher in a sense because he says things like, war is the father of all things.
So he says enigmatic things, just sort of big statements. And it's like, what? Sorry, what exactly does that mean, though?
Yeah.
I understand that he was very haughty, that he was quite, well, very arrogant, I suppose might be the word. That he walked around thinking that he had all the answers and he could just make giant statements and that was sort of enough because he was who he was. And he sounds like a very interesting character. He might not have been a nice person, but certainly a very, very interesting person. But I think one of the key things is that didn't he sort of insist that what he said was written down, whereas some of the early ones didn't necessarily insist on that. Or that he would even write things down himself, which again, there wasn't a long tradition of doing that.
I think that was Empedocles and Parmenides, who said that what they write is a product of divine inspiration and divine revelation.
That's Empedocles.
Yes, I don't think it's in Heraclitus, but I may be wrong.
He thought what he said was so great. He said, this needs to be saved, basically.
I don't know, but I would put it in the following terms. He thought that many people were sort of just following custom blindly. And he portrayed them as beings, let's say, asleep. And he said that philosophy wakes you up. He was sort of saying like that they need a red pill or something.
Right,
Is it
yeah.
a red pill or a...
Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is, one of the interesting things, methodologically speaking, about Heraclitus is that he's not on the one hand reacting against the senses, but he does say that the senses are inadequate and that we should meditate upon the differences in perspective that the senses reveal to us. And he said this, but he's not an empiricist, as we would say. That's possibly a bit anachronistic, but let us just say it. He doesn't think that the senses are enough. And he has this, I would say, beautiful line where he says, eyes and ears are bad witnesses to those with barbarian souls. He is using the word barbarian in a pejorative sense, but not all Greeks did so. He is using it in a pejorative sense. How does this strike you? This the statement, eyes and ears are bad witnesses to those with barbarian souls.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? I mean, it does seem to, or it does really imply that you're saying there's a whole unseen, well, probably unseeable element to the world or to the universe. But it is there. Don't be mistaken. It is there. Everything that you can hear and see, there's more. There's more, though.
Yes, I think this is what he means. But I want to add something in order to prevent a possible misunderstanding. That he think that many times the senses lead us astray.
Oh, right, okay.
So it's not just that he think that if we don't have a noble soul, and the noble part of the soul for him is the logos in a sense, or the rational part of the soul, we are going to fall somehow prey to our senses. We're not going to rise up to approximate the divine nature within us. We're going to be a bit more chthonic or telluric, more earthly, which he thinks is not what we are supposed to be like.
You'll be actively misled by your senses if you're not careful, if you don't study philosophy.
Yes.
Right.
So, and he's credited also with some other views that Plato and Aristotle are think that describe his point, where we say everything is in flux. And I don't think he says this specifically somewhere. And this is where Aristotle reacts against him and says that he constantly violates the law of non-contradiction.
Right.
But, I mean, it's a different way of thinking.
There's a great line, one of my favourite line probably of Heraclitus is, one cannot step into the same river twice.
Yes.
That's a very famous one, isn't it? Perhaps his most famous one.
Yeah.
But that's nice, isn't it? Because, of course, the river is a metaphor for sort of the ever-moving, ever-changing world, universe, cosmos.
On this, I have to add that many times I find this very insightful in particular situations in life, because sometimes I really feel the need to do things I did when I was younger. Let's say read the comics I was reading when I was younger, the books, or watch particular movies I liked when I was younger, but because I'm trying to recapture some parts of my youth, but it's never the same.
Right, yeah.
It's never
You've
the same.
changed.
Yeah.
Right.
It doesn't have the same meaning in it.
Yeah. It's very interesting, isn't it? I mean,
yes.
Because I think he also talked heavily or a lot about how, again, the idea of things being in flux, or everything actually is in flux, moving from one state to another, and that's sort of, again, sort of a fundamental thing, to the point where, if you move from life to death, or you move from hot to cold, or you move from wet to dry, or something, that they're intimately connected, those two things. They may even be the same thing, or the flip side of the same coin. All those ideas mixed up together. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? The day and night, or war and peace, they're actually the same thing. But again, quite often I think we get, don't we, just the odd line. It would just be a line of his, So it's possible to interpret it in more than one way, if you try.
But I must say on this quote, about Flux and not being able to step into the same river twice, I think it has gotten so bad in the way I experience it that I don't want to go back anymore.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it ruins it.
It ruins it.
Yeah.
I remember this with a movie. When I was young, I really liked Ace Ventura movies.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, when I was 6, 7 years old, possibly a bit older, but not much older. But at some point I rewatched it and said, why did I like this thing?
Yeah. I had to say, when I was a kid, I saw the film Independence Day.
Yes.
And when I first saw it, I can't remember how old I was, sort of 13 or 14, 15, or something like that. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah.
In my mind, it was the best film ever made.
Yeah.
It was amazing. It was perfect. It was a perfect film.
Yes.
I didn't watch it for ages, like 10 years. Went for 15 years or something. Rewatched it, happened to be on TV. And I was like, watch it. I was like, this is so corny and lame.
Yeah.
This is so lame. It's ruined it now.
Yeah.
And just the other day, there was a sequel of it I watched. And it was The Pits. It was terrible. It was really terrible. I've had the same with cartoons, actually.
Yeah.
Absolutely in love with some cartoons. And then from a small child, and then watched them for whatever reason, somehow watched it again in my 30s. And see, and you're just a completely different person, aren't you?
Yes.
The river has flowed on.
Yep.
You're a different river now. So it's not the same. It cannot be the same, actually.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.